You promised me pretty, Steinman. Now look at me! Look at me! Sorry about that. So, Metro 2033 by Dmitry Glukhovsky is a post-apocalyptic Russian adventure novel with survival horror elements that follows a sort of Homeric Odyssey narrative pattern similar to Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. And boy, if you're a fan of like a Mad Max universe, the Fallout universe, Fallout video game series, you definitely should check this out. This is like the Russian Fallout that in many ways is a more bleak, more gritty, more hard-edged universe with a lot of extremely realistic elements that, in my opinion, is more immersive and altogether more meaningful and memorable than the video game series if you're familiar with the video game adaptation. So the most unique aspect of all among many is the bleakness, and one of the reasons for that is the moment-to-moment survival situations and just describing the character doing basic survival-oriented things. That aside, and just the brutal violence, that even more so though, seeing another element of depth and uniqueness that I've never seen before in the post-apocalyptic genre is just the clash of various different ideologies of the second generation of people living underground in the Moscow metro, trying to recreate society-building ideologies, the sense of cultural and sociological identity of what it means to be a citizen, but without any context to what the world was like, because the surface world has been nuked and is not inhabitable by humans, and so this very, very therefore sympathetic second generation of humans is basically just making like a sad, ironic mimic of something they have no reference to, which paints an interesting psychological theory about what is actually meaningful in terms of culture and politics and ideology. And so it really couldn't be more sad, and is also incredibly imagined and visualized and believable. However, there are aspects to the story that are not entirely believable, which is a minor detractor, because the overall good qualities make up for the bad. Those would involve like comic book style monsters that is hard to believe like could have, devolved or evolved depending on how you look at it from the nuclear fallout and radiation and such. And a lot of it with like vague descriptions. Another sort of paradoxical good quality of the book involving opposition like the monsters, which at the same time is like not entirely believable, but written in a way that stylistically is totally executed well and believable, is paranormal threats. And that is sort of described in vague ways. For example, you couldn't really isolate it towards a disease so much as this high levels of anxiety. And I guess if I were to try to put it into words and make scientific sense of it, it would be if anxiety there was such a thing of different levels of anxiety being contagious. In other words, some sort of paranormal force that feeds off of people's collective fear and then begins to take on physical manifestations. That sort of, you could call it a interdimensional monster or intelligence or a demonic intelligence, but I've never seen the awesome, well-rendered force that also harmonizes with the solemn, despairing sort of tone, this omnipresent dread, and then just mixed with the introspection that a lot of the inner monologue and contemplation of the protagonist, mixed with the bleary day-to-day chores of the world of survival in this harsh, bitter world. It sort of combines with that in a way that makes you feel like everything is totally bleak and there's really no point to anything. And so the fact that the hunter characters in the story, which this, by the way, is the main character is sort of training to become one of them, more or less, because the plot of the book is he's trying to save his village from these mind-affected zombie-type denizens of the metro by going to the city of Polsk and for information, as well as to give them information about this new threat. And he's, in the meanwhile, there's other missions and sort of side quests, if you will, as he goes from community to community, which has this various emerging evolved take on how to run society and such. And in so doing, sorry, I kind of just over described that. In so doing, he's kind of becoming one of these hunter characters. Now, these hunter characters are ideal and have a level of like highly unique Russian grit as a point of inspiration in the novel for being the natural, supposed, instinctual, evolved consequence of those who are stuck in a system of a mentality that has become a sort of group collective, meaning they're acting on instinct in a hypothetical future scenario in which the various methods of technological execution for doing certain survival tasks on behalf of altruism for the human race is very much a tribal reemergence of a medieval psychological mindset that would only emerge in this specific scenario that is surprisingly and incredibly believable for like nothing like that ever happening before in human history. That's what makes me think that this author is somewhat of a genius. Like the overall execution and originality of the world definitely compensates for the aspects that are not entirely believable. And if you're a fan of the sort of more existential horror that is just really, really bleak and dreary and sad and has a sort of responsible tone about it, which is in one sense one large symbolic cautionary tale against nuclear war, which could inadvertently promote idealism to try to, get the human race to cooperate, set aside differences. You'll definitely be a fan of this book. I highly recommend it. I give it a 10 out of 10. Because I never read anything quite like it. It is, there's a few aspects that are kind of slow, and a few overall narrative structures that we've seen before, a few tropes that kind of slightly remove the immersive experience but however, I will say, when the badass adrenaline-fueled action and suspense that builds up and culminates in action, when the shit hits the fan, so to say, it's really worthwhile and totally believable and gets you highly immersed all the more. So it definitely has that sort of roller coaster up and down sort of effect of like there's just a lot to offer here. It's definitely a lot smarter and overall more entertaining than I thought it would be, and it's worth getting to the end. It's worth the journey. Mostly just because overall the world is interesting and it's extremely harrowing. The setting is so harsh and the stakes are so high for the hopeful survival of the human race, the sacrifices the character has to make so like heroic and daring that you can't help but be inspired. Especially what another very unique aspect is the sort of Russian attitude that I think is specific to the sort of tougher aspects demonstrated through the hunter characters, of just having the odds infinitely stacked against you and sort of laughing it off and progressing through it in a way that you sort of need to embrace a sort of inner nihilism in order to have any reason to keep going in this world, because like the way you look at it, you're dead as it stands anyway. And so it's just like this you can't help but read this novel and feel afraid and sort of forcing you, if you're going to even begin to try to imagine the world by what it implies. All of the implications make for the darkest future setting that I've ever read at this point in my reading career, so to say, that you can't help but get a sort of residual confidence and courage from it. So, was there anything else? The political perspective, of seeing communism versus, from like the Soviet era, they have certain societies like trying to copy or promote aspects of Nazism, and then another promoting Stalinism, and then there's independence, and then there's societies that have imploded, and it sort of gets a little bit political about that and has something to say about that, and that's the overall sense of community and patriotism is so radically different from my own heritage, my own culture, my being American, that I found that absolutely fascinating, especially in the context of post-nuclear setting. So it is the background themes are like community, sacrifice, persistence, fearlessness, and those are huge understatements. Like it is definitely a gritty, mind expanding, big, complex universe with a lot of like, it's amazing to contemplate that someone could come up with this and imagine it so fleshed out. This world, it's a world that, you know, the video games deserve to have video games adapted because it is just so boldly and it's big. It's overall creation is big. It's hard to imagine that one guy came up with this. And so basically, if you're a fan of these types of things, definitely don't miss this. I definitely think it needs more exposure because I think it's underrated. And also because, you know, it's in the form of a novel, the frequency of action, the likelihood of surviving certain violent moments makes it all the more realistic and therefore hard hitting than 1,000 small victories against the threat of death in a video game type situation. So for that reason, I think overall it is much more memorable and impactful than the video game. I think I played the video game. I didn't finish it, but I think it's good as well. But definitely don't miss this if you're a fan of anything post-apocalyptic. It's an absolute masterpiece among its genre. So yeah, Metro 2033 by Dmitry Glukhovsky. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10. Thanks.